Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to a spoiler-free review of Full Moon by Jim Butcher. This is the second Dresden Files book and I will leave the Dresden playlist on my channel linked in the description below, just in case you haven't read the first book and you're finding the review for the second one. I do have a review of Stormfront, so if you want to go and check that out, please do. So this book takes off a short time after Stormfront has ended and we open with Dresden, who is at the bar and he is bankrupt almost and he's had no work in ages. He also hasn't heard from Murphy in like a month, and suddenly his phone rings and there has been a brutal murder, and he goes to the scene of the murder at Murphy's distressed request and realizes that there is a full moon and the body at the scene looks like it's been mauled by a wolf, but none of the bite marks at the attack match up with the actual dental records of proper wolves. So naturally this book is about werewolves, and I don't know why, but the fact that this was called Full Moon and it was an urban fantasy and I didn't initially connect that it was about werewolves, I don't know what was going on in my brain. Duh, of course it's about werewolves. I like how this book incorporated recurring characters that appeared in the first book, and while I didn't love this book as much as Stormfront, I did really like Dresden's humour and wit that was prevalent in the series. I think that's going to be a very much recurring aspect of the book series, and that is definitely why I've been continuing on reading it. I've also heard that not liking the second book as much as the first one is a fairly common occurrence across this series, and it's an experience that a lot of readers relate to, but the fact that Dresden remains the same character that he did in book one, with his characterization being dry and witty and self-deprecating and chaotic, is why I continued on reading this book, and it is what kept me going throughout the rest of the plot as well, because as you'll find out throughout the rest of this review, I didn't really love the plot in here, but I did really like the characterization. Something that I loved about this book is that it really delved into the lore surrounding werewolves, and I just think werewolves are cool and I love the danger attached with them, and I like how urban fantasies explore that in different ways, and this one had a really unique way of doing so because there was more than one type of werewolf, but I like that it delved into the past, and Dresden was like, why would anyone choose to become a werewolf? That seems ridiculous to me. And the reply he got was, well, if you were a peasant in like the 1500s and you could get a layer of warm fur and hunt for an extra meal to survive, of course you'd become a werewolf. It was an interesting perspective to include, and it also gave you so much depth to what werewolves were, where they came from, and the history behind them and how long they've existed in just a short dialogue exchange. And I just really like that there was that nuance to the book and the world building, and that is ultimately what I really enjoy seeing, especially in the sequel to a series when the world building starts to expand and supernatural creatures of different kinds start popping up, and it just gave it a depth that I really enjoyed, and I like the quality of that depth too. It seemed fairly thought out and I just liked it. But unfortunately, unlike the first book, I actually picked out two things at the beginning of this one that ended up being key elements that played into the plot closer to the end, and that actually didn't happen to me in book one, and I thought it would be consistent over the rest of the book so far, but unfortunately I did pick out something. I didn't pick out exactly what it was going to do or what was going to happen because of this thing that I saw in the plot, but I did pick out a key element. So I picked something out, but I didn't know what it was going to be entirely, if that makes sense. So the fact that I saw something coming and it wasn't a red herring designed to make the reader see it and then be like, hey, plot twist, that was a little bit disappointing to me compared to the first book. However, we do see more development of Dresden in this book, not so much as a forward building character arc, but more so in flashbacks that you have to give more context for his character, which happened a little bit in book one, but because it was setting up a bunch of other stuff around Dresden that it didn't focus on it too much, but it definitely had more screen time and more detail to it in this book than it did in the first one, and that's one of the elements that I really liked about this book. Mostly because it gave us a deeper understanding of who Dresden was and where he's come from, and it also led into a cinematic moment that happened about halfway through the book. I'm not going to say specifics about what it is, but it really gave you an insight into the depth of Dresden's power, and it was a very action-packed scene, but it also made me realize why Dresden seems to get injured in each book, because that needs to happen in order to give him a hindrance and deplete his capability to use magic, because obviously if he's injured he can't do the same things as if he was healthy. So it gives him a bit of a hindrance for the plot so that he's not all powerful, and I like when characters don't become all powerful because then they become boring. So I really enjoyed that Jim Butcher included that in here because it gave Dresden less of an edge, and so the outcome of this cinematic moment is less clear as a reader because you know that he's injured and you don't know what is going to happen next. Like the first book, I did give this a 4 out of 5 stars, but I did like the first book a little bit better. But again, I'm still going to continue on with this series. It is a blast and I'm having so much fun, and I'm for the most part being surprised, and so I'm definitely going to continue on because I have the next few audiobooks queued up in my Audible to listen to. But as far as Full Moon stands, I felt the plot was a little bit thinner in places and I didn't care as much about the surrounding characters as I cared about the characters in the first book because they're recurring, so I had more of a connection to characters I'd already seen, and so when characters were getting introduced I didn't care as much, especially because there seemed to be a multitude of them in here. That said though, I did enjoy the dynamic between Dresden and Murphy in the first book, and it happened less in this book. This was more about Dresden going solo in certain aspects, and while I enjoyed what he did, I wanted more of Murphy because that was a dynamic that was like a key element that I enjoyed in book one, and it happened in this book in places, but not enough to like fully satisfy me. So across the rest of the series, I'm really hoping that Murphy crops up more. Additionally, something else I liked was that there was like a nod to something darker that was lurking in the shadows. And I like that the series seems to be expanding beyond these closed plot lines of the first and the second book. Even though there are recurring characters, obviously, the mysteries tend to close in each book. And I like that there was a nod to something bigger, which means the plot is eventually going to open up a bit further and it's going to get higher stakes, I think. So I'm really greatly anticipating a grander scheme in terms of plot, but the plot in this book didn't do it for me, but I know going forward the plot and characterization will only amp up, so I am jumping headfirst into the rest of the books in this series for that reason. And finally, before I wrap up my overall thoughts, another thing that I really appreciated in Full Moon was that while Dresden was funny and also formidable, he also had moments of vulnerability, and those moments were emotional and physical, and he did cry at certain points, so I like that he is so well-rounded as a character. There are also moments where he gets attacked and then he just spits blood out of his mouth and carries on with it. So he's very well-rounded for that reason. You get to see different aspects of his personality, and different characters tend to pull out different emotions from him as well as different scenarios, and because we followed him around for a little bit of time now, you're getting to see more of his depth, and so I like what is slowly being peeled back so that we can experience. But again, I'm looking forward to more of that happening in the next installments, because it did happen a bit here and the characterization definitely carried this book for me, but the plot, again, it was interesting, and obviously I finished this book and I really enjoyed it, so it's not like a super negative thing. But like the rest of the people who have read this book and have overwhelmingly said that they didn't love it as much as book one, I definitely fall in that camp. If it was a bit stronger, like I said, I would have given it a 5 stars instead of a 4, but I did enthusiastically get to the end, and I'm obviously invested in this series because I wouldn't be doing these reviews if I didn't care. So I can't wait to continue my Dresden experience. As this stands, it's a 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm super pumped to continue the series. If you have read these books, please do let me know in the comments. I would love to chat to you. Please don't spoil me because I'm very, very new to this series and I want to experience everything fresh, and I would really appreciate no spoilers. But thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you in the comments and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.